let's talk about improvement prompting. So this is one of my favorite prompting techniques. And so sequentially, I believe that this is going to come after summarization and simplification. So you may or may not have watched those lessons, but in each of those lessons, I've mentioned that those types of prompting, those techniques are very general. There's kind of 1,000 different ways that you could go about writing those prompts. Improvement prompting is interesting because it's going to the level of generality is going to depend on a few different factors, right? It's going to be, okay, are you trying to improve, a blog post? Are you trying to improve a piece of code? Are you trying to improve some sort of documentation, or maybe you're writing a ticket, like an engineering ticket on your team, which is kind of what we're going to be looking at here. So the type of improvement prompt you write is going to very heavily depend on that use case. So this can both be very general or very specific, right? For things like general purpose writing, that's going to be a pretty general prompt, right? But if your team, say that the way you write tickets to Jira or Linear or Asana or Notion or what have you, your team probably has a very specific format that they like to see those written as, right? To kind of keep everybody on the same page. So improvement prompting is a really nice way to basically take a very simple text input, and it's able to sort of format the simple text and improve that into sort of the end version that you like. So that may or may not make a ton of sense. That'll make more sense as we actually start writing this thing. But let's actually just start writing the prompt right away. So, like I said, we're going to kind of use the example of writing a kind of a feature request ticket for example, I'm a power user of a product called Linear, which is a project management tool. And so I'll typically write a lot of tickets for, various things that I need to add to whatever I'm working on, right? So one of the things that you would do would be like improve this, add new button. Say we're adding a new button to somewhere in our product, right? And if you just said improve this, add new button ticket for our project management system, and then we were to say, improve it just to have the basic user messages that we can run here. If we run this, it's like, okay, this is a great example of the door rule in practice, which is like the AI is going to get this, and it's like, okay, I don't know the context of the button. I don't know what your project is. I don't know what your system is. I don't know who you are. I don't know what format you like. So it's just going to have to kind of guess, and it's just going to come up with this, right? And this is like totally nonsensical. This isn't helpful at all. So this is a great example of writing a great prompt isn't just helpful, but it's actually a necessity, right? Whereas things with like summarization and simplification, those are sort of nice to haves, and you can hone the results to better suit what you want. But this is a good example of where like even a bad prompt just doesn't even work for what we want. So if we want to write an improvement prompt that's actually going to take our add a new button response to write a high quality ticket for our project management system, we really need to define what that looks like. So let's actually just get writing this, because I think it's going to be helpful to actually just start writing immediately, and then we can kind of break it down a little bit more. But I'm actually just going to start with a role right away. So what we're going to say is we're just going to say you are a senior technical writer reviewing a short feature description. Okay, so this is already way better than what we have, because we're basically saying, okay, here's your role. So this is going to imply things like tone and format and quality of response, things like that. So we're already, just by some of the nuance of some of these words, we're already dramatically impacting the output that we're going to get. Okay, we're saying you're going to be reviewing a short feature description. Okay, so the model knows what our kind of input is going to be. Okay, and then we want to say your goal. Okay, so we're going to give it a task. Your goal is to expand and clarify the details so developers can act on it confidently. Okay, so this isn't super detailed, but it's detailed enough so that the model knows, okay, the goal here is basically to take a feature description and turn it into something that developers can work with, right? So what we can say is we can say like original text, and then we can say, you know, what was it? Add a new button is what we were working with. Okay, so now it knows, okay, this is what that short feature description was. Okay, and we're making it very clear by labeling it with original text, and then we're adding some quotes around it so it kind of knows that, hey, this is what the text is. So now if we do improvement task, okay, bullet points are a nice way to format things for models. So we'll say clarify the task, clarify the button's purpose and functionality. Okay, so one of the things that we're going to kind of see in this particular example is not only do you want to write a prompt so that you get a good initial response, but you want to, in prompts that are going to end up being conversational in nature, which is what a prompt like this is going to end up being, you want to give the model some room to go back and forth with you, right? So a good example of this is literally just sort of framing it as if you were framing a real world workflow, which is like if I went to a PM on my team and said, hey, we're going to add a new button here, right? The project manager who was kind of tasked, or in this case, you know, the technical writer that's sort of tasked with creating the ticket for that's going to be, okay, what is the button? What's it for? Why do we need it? You know, what kind of, you know, how do you want it to look? It's right. It's going to ask you a bunch of questions. What we're going to be doing here with this line is we're basically giving the model room to sort of interface back and forth with us to actually figure out the information it needs to write this ticket. Okay, so that's great. We want to specify how it fits into, we'll say how it fits into the existing UI, include any requirements or constraints. Okay, so pretty common for like, you know, writing a ticket. And then we want to say maintain a concise but detailed writing style, right? So to go back to the anatomy of a good prompt stuff, right? This is kind of tone and style and defining that a little bit. And then of course we want to specify our output format, which is we want to say, and we'll keep things relatively basic. We won't get too in the weeds here. We'll just say 1 to 2 sentence summary. Sentence. Okay, we want a detailed description. Okay, so this is going to be more in depth, and we'll do 1 to 2 paragraphs. Description. Okay, so we'll start with a summary. We'll get a detailed description that goes a little bit more in depth, and then we'll give it a little bit of extra room to kind of freestyle. We'll just say initial notes or references. Okay. And so this is an interesting use case too, because what's going to kind of happen here is the model's basically going to use this as our input. So typically what would happen if you were developing an app or something that were to do this, or your own tool, you would probably have some user input and maybe you inject that into the prompts or whatever. So what we'll actually do here is we're actually going to do a bracket that just says see user message. And what we're going to do here is we'll just send this text, so kind of our initial short feature description, in as the user message. And because we've sort of put this in brackets, the model is going to be intelligent enough to infer that, okay, we need to take whatever the user message is, and that's going to basically be what this value is. So you'll see if I run this, we get the summary. Okay, so this is 2 sentences. Boom, it's adhering to the output that we wanted. You'll see we get a detailed description here. It looks like we're getting a single paragraph, but this is obviously much more detailed. And then you can see we're also getting the additional notes or references here. But one of the things you'll note that the model didn't really do is it didn't really do that back and forth that I was sort of mentioning here. So what we want to do is we actually want to say, before you give the formatted response, make sure to chat back and forth with the user to clarify anything you need to know. And what you'll see here, if we trash this assistant response, is instead of immediately getting the output format that we asked for, by kind of specifying, hey, we're going to give you a little bit of room to work with the user before you actually generate your format, what's going to happen is we're going to get a little chat back and forth. And then once the model has everything it needs to know, then it's going to kind of spit out our format. So this, instead of just being sort of a one shot, give it a prompt, get an answer, boom, done. This is going to be a little bit more of a chat based prompt where the model needs to work with us a few times. We'll have to go back, I bet, probably like 1 to 3 times, depending on the quality of answer we give it, before it actually spits out our format. And you can even do things like specify at most let the user clarify 3 different times. Once you hit 3 interactions, make sure you give the formatted response if you have not yet, right? So we can almost even kind of tell the model to limit how many times it can chat back and forth with us. So let's go ahead and give this a run. We're going to need to get rid of this user message and resend it. Okay, so you can see the model is now chatting with us to clarify some information. So you can see what is the intended purpose and functionality of the button. Okay, so we'll do, it's a login button. Where should it be placed within the user interface? Okay, so that's kind of point 2 here. Please put it on the top right next to the sign up button. And then are there any specific requirements or constraints to consider? Let's just say, please make the button blue. So what the model is going to do when we send this off, it's going to basically try and figure out, okay, do I have all the details that I need to give the formatted response back, or do I need to ask anything else? So let's see what we get here. Okay, so you can see it actually wants to clarify a few more things. And this is good, right? So theoretically, this would be the second interaction. So we haven't hit that 3 interaction limit yet. So this is pretty expected behavior. Let's add some framer motion animations to it for a nice design. Okay, that's a basic animation library. So basically, we just want to specify some styles. And then are there any specific size dimensions or typography? We'll just say, use the same size and font as the sign up button. And then we can send that off. Okay, and so you can see at this point, the model apparently feels like it has enough information to go off of, and now we get our formatted response. So we get the summary, we get the detailed description, and then we get the additional notes and references here. Okay, so that is pretty helpful. So that is obviously a much, much better experience than we were getting than not only just the very first one that was that basic one-liner, but even the previous one where we didn't have this paragraph that specified, hey, you're allowed to kind of chat back and forth with us to gather the information you need so that we can get kind of the information to get what's required for the output format. Okay, and the cool thing is, of course, this is, I'm trying to make this fairly simple, but you can make this as specific and detailed of a format as you want, right? If you have a very rigid, a PRD format on your team or something like that, you can even imagine, maybe we're not talking about like, product tickets in a project management system, but maybe you're talking about blog posts. Maybe you're like, hey, I've been working on this section of my blog post and I want to improve it. Like this is kind of the format I'm looking for. These are kind of the things that I want you to take into consideration. Like, let's have a little bit of a chat about it before you give me your improved version, things like that. So improvement prompts are very good. This also comes in handy when you're working with things like agents, because oftentimes to make AI agents work, you need to give them very specific, concrete results. And so what happens is, like, users will give, more often than not, pretty vanilla responses, pretty vanilla inputs in requesting the things. And what you can do is almost have some sort of an improvement prompt running in the background that takes the user's request, improves it to match a specific format that the AI agent can be really good at working with. And that can kind of serve as an intermediary prompt to help get your agent better input, so that the accuracy and the ability for the agent to run its task kind of drastically improves. One thing I'm going to sneak in here really quickly is in our text guide for this lesson, we're actually trying something where we're going to, in the video, show you one example, and then in the guide kind of show you another one in the step-by-step section. So one of the key things that I wanted to show you in the step-by-step improvement that you'll see below in our text section is this is actually a perfect use case for examples. So in our summarization and our simplification lesson, we didn't show any examples of using examples in your prompt. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually paste this full prompt. We're not going to go over this entire thing because this is explained in the step-by-step section, but I do want to talk about the example that we're giving here and why this is a good use case for adding examples to kind of guide the AI. So the reason that this is such a perfect use case for examples is because, as I've mentioned, the output format is going to be heavily dependent on how your team works. So one of the things is like if your team is used to taking a basic request and turning that into, a more complicated PRD or, engineering ticket, what you can do, right, is because typically you're going to have a bunch of examples in your backlog or whatever of real tickets that you guys use in production, right? One of the things that you can do is you can literally just include an example of that. So in the section that we have, or if in the example that we have in the text section here, we're basically saying add export to PDF button on reports page. Okay, so this is the basic user input, right? And you can see we're sort of prefacing this by saying, here's a good example of how you successfully improved a similar feature request, right? And then we're saying, okay, here's the user message. All right, so this is the example user message. And then we're saying, here's your response. And then what we're doing is we're actually putting an example response. So what this is going to do is this is going to really guide the model and show, okay, this response is how the user actually wants me to generally format their responses, okay? And so this is basically what you would call example-based prompting or few-shot prompting, which is you're sort of providing input-output pairs into the model's prompt itself. And this almost is kind of like a lightweight version of fine-tuning for those of you who are familiar with, even if you've never fine-tuned a model, you've probably at least heard the term fine-tuning a model. And what you can kind of do with these input-output example pairs, you can effectively just fine-tune within your prompt. Okay, and we call this concept few-shot prompting. And so it's just going to basically guide the model and give it some context on what answers should look like. So if your team has a ton of different tickets historically that you've used, what you can do is you can do 1, you can do 3 to 5, you can do 10, you can do as many examples of these tickets as you want. And the more examples that you give the model, the better it's basically going to be able to infer the style, the format, all that kind of stuff of how it should actually respond. So I just wanted to include that here because something like an improvement prompt is a perfect example of the anatomy of a prompt. I think we call this like step 6 generally. The order of those steps doesn't really matter. They're more bullet points. But the point is, for example or few shot based prompting, this is a perfect use case.